When she walked into the conference room with that victory smile and my chair beneath her, I knew the game had begun. The $6.2 million Rexlon deal was supposed to be her crowning achievement, her proof that youth and connections trumped experience. I sat in the back row, silent, watching her confidently click through her presentation. She had no idea that the numbers she'd stolen from my old files were 3 months out of date. And when she hit slide 3, I didn't even need to say a word. My name is Natalie Rhodes. And until 6 weeks ago, I was the one sitting in that leather chair at the head of the conference table. 38 years old, 10 years with Veriton Dynamics, architect of deals that kept our mid-sized tech consulting firm competitive in Denver's cutthroat market. The Rexlon Synergy acquisition alone, $22 million in revenue, had my fingerprints all over it. I'd spent 18 months nurturing that relationship, understanding their pain points, crafting solutions that spoke their language. Then, Madison Kerr happened, 29, fresh from our external affairs department. She had that particular combination of ambition and charm that made C-suite executives forget to ask hard questions. I'd seen her type before. Usually they flame out within a year when substance is required over style. But Madison had something more dangerous. The deputy director's ear, and, if office rumors were true, considerably more than that. The restructuring meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just finished reviewing Q3 projections when the calendar invite popped up. 15 minutes, conference room B, mandatory attendance. In corporate speak, that's the equivalent of a funeral announcement. We need to optimize our strategic leadership structure, the deputy director announced, avoiding my eyes while Madison sat beside him, her manicured nails drumming silently on her portfolio. Effective immediately, Madison will be taking over as head of strategy. Natalie, we're creating a new position for you, Senior Strategic Advisor. Senior Strategic Advisor? In the corporate world, that's like being made honorary captain of a ship that's already sailed. No budget, no team, no actual authority. Just a fancy title that meant I'd be doing Madison's homework while she took the credit. I'll need all your files on the Rexlon account transferred by end of week, Madison said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes calculating. She was already measuring my office for new furniture. I nodded, kept my expression neutral. 10 years in corporate America teaches you that the first one to show emotion loses. Of course, I'll make sure you have everything you need. What I didn't say was that everything would include the outdated market analysis from Q1, the projections before Rexlon's competitor acquisition, and the financial models that hadn't been updated since their subsidiary sell-off. She wanted my files. She'd get exactly what she asked for, nothing more, nothing less. As I walked back to my soon-to-be former office, I heard Madison laugh at something the deputy director whispered. The sound echoed off the glass walls like a victory bell. She thought she'd won. But in chess, the player who celebrates too early usually doesn't see the trap until it's already sprung. The Rexlon deal was scheduled to close in 6 weeks. 6 weeks for Madison to prove she was more than just a pretty face with powerful friends. 6 weeks for her to realize that stealing someone's work without understanding it is like trying to fly a plane with just the keys. I had work to do. The transition to Senior Strategic Advisor was as humiliating as they'd intended. My corner office with its view of the Rockies became a cubicle on the 3rd floor, wedged between the printer room and the break area. The constant whir of the copy machine became my new soundtrack, punctuated by the microwave's beep every time someone reheated their lunch. But the real insult wasn't the downgrade, it was the cleanup duty. Every time Madison stumbled, and she stumbled often, I'd get a frantic call from her assistant. Ms. Kerr needs you to review the Patterson Industries proposal. Translation: Madison had promised something she couldn't deliver, and I had 3 hours to fix it before the client noticed. I did the work, every time, not out of loyalty to Madison, but because my reputation was still tied to these deals. When they failed, people wouldn't remember who held the title. They'd remember who built the relationship. So I corrected her numbers, rewrote her strategies, and watched her take credit for saves she didn't even understand. The public humiliation was worse. Madison had apparently decided that keeping me around wasn't enough. She needed to make sure everyone knew their places in the new hierarchy. "Thanks for the input, Natalie," she'd say in meetings, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But I think we need fresh perspectives here. The market's evolved past those outdated methodologies." She turned to the room with a conspiratorial smile. "No offense to our senior staff, but sometimes experience can be a liability when innovation is required." The younger employees would shift uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with me. The older ones, those who'd been through their own corporate purges, would offer subtle nods of sympathy when Madison wasn't looking. But nobody spoke up. That's not how you survive in corporate America. I started noticing things, small details that didn't add up. Emails from Madison to the deputy director that were quickly recalled. Documents in our shared drive that showed multiple edits by her login, always late at night. Always on files she shouldn't have access to. Most telling were the Rexlon presentation materials. She'd gutted my comprehensive analysis and replaced it with flashy graphics and buzzword-heavy slides that said nothing substantial. Then I found the smoking gun. While reviewing an urgent revision for Madison at 9 p.m. on a Thursday, I discovered she'd been pulling data from my old quarterly reports, specifically the Q1 analysis that predated Rexlon's major market shift. She'd updated the dates, but not the data, creating a fundamentally flawed picture of Rexlon's current position. I stared at my screen, realizing what this meant. The Q2 acquisition of Rexlon's biggest competitor, Teknova, had completely changed their market strategy. The subsidiary they'd sold off in March had been hemorrhaging money, making their financial projections look far worse than reality. Madison's entire presentation was built on a foundation of obsolete information. My finger hovered over the compose button. One email to Madison or the deputy director could fix this. One warning could save the deal. I closed my laptop. The next morning, I watched Madison strut through the office in her new Louboutins, practicing her presentation in the glass-walled conference room. She'd invited half the office to watch her rehearsal, a premature victory lap. The slides flickered past, gorgeous design, professional transitions, and numbers that were precisely 3 months and one major acquisition out of date. "The Rexlon meeting is next week," she announced to her assembled audience. "This is how you close a $6.2 million deal." She clicked to slide 3, the market comparison chart. "Their position relative to competitors gives us incredible leverage in negotiations." I sipped my coffee from my cubicle, listening to her explain competitive advantages that no longer existed, cite market shares that had shifted dramatically, and reference a subsidiary that Rexlon had already divested. Her confidence was absolute. Her data was fiction. That evening, I backed up every original file, every email chain, every timestamp showing when documents were accessed and by whom. I organized it all in a private folder, encrypted and duplicated to my personal cloud. Not to sabotage, I wouldn't need to. Madison was doing that all on her own. But when the inevitable collapse came, I'd need proof that the original strategy had been sound before she'd butchered it. The Rexlon meeting was set for Monday, 2 p.m. Madison sent out an all-staff email Friday afternoon. Subject line: "Watch and learn, the future of strategic consulting." I marked my calendar. Some lessons are best learned the hard way. The weekend before the Rexlon meeting, I did something that went against every instinct I developed in 10 years of corporate politics. I tried to warn them. Not directly. I wasn't that naive. But I crafted an anonymous email from a generic Gmail account, highlighting the critical data discrepancies in the Rexlon presentation. I kept it factual, professional, even included links to the recent market reports showing Teknova's acquisition and the subsidiary sale. I sent it to both Madison and the deputy director Sunday evening. Subject line: "Urgent Rexlon presentation data concerns." Monday morning arrived with Madison's confident heels clicking past my cubicle. She was actually humming, as she gathered her materials. The anonymous email had clearly made no impact. Maybe it went to spam. Maybe she'd dismissed it as sabotage from a jealous colleague. Or maybe, and this seemed most likely, She was so convinced of her own brilliance that contradictory data simply didn't register. I wasn't the only one preparing for the meeting. Throughout the morning, I noticed unusual activity. The IT director was backing up servers. The legal team had been called in early. The CEO, typically absent on Mondays, was in his office with the blinds drawn. Something bigger was happening, and the Rexlon meeting was just one piece of it. My official role was observation and support, which translated to sitting in the back row with the junior associates while Madison commanded the room. I arrived early, choosing a seat with a clear view of both the presentation screen and the Rexlon team's faces. Details matter in moments like these. Reactions tell you more than words ever could. I also came prepared. My laptop contained every original file, every authentic data point, every piece of evidence showing the real Rexlon story. Not to interfere, I'd made my choice about that, but because I knew someone would eventually ask for the truth. When that moment came, I'd be ready. The Rexlon team arrived precisely at 2 p.m. 3 executives, David Park, their CEO, Jennifer Walsh, CFO, and surprisingly, Marcus Rivera, their newly appointed Strategic Development VP, hired specifically after the Technova acquisition. I knew Marcus from industry conferences. He was sharp, detail-oriented, and had probably memorized every shift in their market position down to the decimal point. Madison didn't recognize the significance of Marcus's presence. She greeted them with her practiced smile, not realizing she was about to present obsolete market data to the very person who'd orchestrated Rexlon's recent transformation. "Before we begin," I said quietly, approaching Madison as she set up her laptop. "Marcus Rivera is new. He joined Rexlon in April, after the Technova deal. He might have questions about—" "I've got this, Natalie." She cut me off, her voice loud enough for others to hear. "Why don't you just take your seat? We wouldn't want to confuse things with outdated perspectives." I nodded, returned to my chair. "You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it recognize it's about to drown." The room settled. Madison clicked to her opening slide, a gorgeous aerial photo of Rexlon's headquarters with revenue projections overlaid in bold graphics. She was good at the performance aspect. I'd give her that. Her voice was confident, her gestures practiced, her timing perfect. Slide 1 introduced the partnership vision, safe territory. Slide 2 outlined Veriton's capabilities and past successes. She even mentioned the $22 million deal I'd closed, though somehow my name didn't make it into her narrative. Then came slide 3. The market comparison chart filled the screen in high definition. Rexlon's position relative to competitors, their market share breakdown, subsidiary performance metrics, all beautifully presented, all precisely 3 months out of date. I watched Marcus Rivera's face change. The polite attention shifted to confusion, then to something harder. He glanced at his CEO, who was frowning at the screen. Jennifer Walsh was already pulling out her tablet, likely comparing Madison's numbers to their actual data. Madison, oblivious, continued her pitch. "As you can see, your market position shows significant vulnerability in the consumer segment, particularly with the underperforming subsidiary dragging down overall margins." "I'm sorry," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through her flow. "Which subsidiary are you referring to?" Madison's smile flickered, but held. "The Denver operation. According to our analysis, we sold that in March," Marcus said flatly. 3 weeks before I joined, it was my first major recommendation. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Additionally," Jennifer Walsh added, her tablet now displaying their real numbers. "These market share percentages. Where did this data come from?" "Because Technova hasn't been our competitor since April. We acquired them." Madison's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, panic, then a desperate attempt at recovery. There must be some miscommunication. Our data shows. Your data shows Q1 positions," David Park, the CEO, said quietly. "Every number on this slide predates the most significant strategic shift in our company's history." I sat perfectly still. watching Madison's castle crumble in real time. She clicked to slide 4, hoping to recover, but the damage was spreading. Every subsequent slide built on the flawed foundation of slide 3. Her entire narrative, Rexlon's vulnerabilities, market opportunities, strategic recommendations, was based on a company that no longer existed. The rest of the presentation unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Each slide Madison clicked through revealed another layer of obsolete information, another strategic recommendation based on market conditions that no longer existed. The Rexlon executives had stopped taking notes. Marcus Rivera was typing furiously on his phone, likely alerting their legal team. Jennifer Walsh had closed her tablet and was staring at Madison with undisguised disappointment. Madison's voice, so confident minutes ago, had developed a tremor. Her hands shook slightly as she clicked through slides faster now, as if speed could somehow salvage the situation. The deputy director, who'd been sitting in the corner like a proud parent at a recital, had gone pale. His phone buzzed repeatedly, but he didn't dare check it. "I think we've seen enough," David Park finally said, his voice cutting through Madison's stammering explanation about projected synergies. "This is concerning. You're asking us to commit $6.2 million based on a fundamental misunderstanding of our current business model." Madison looked desperately around the room, her eyes finally landing on me. For a brief moment, I saw the calculation. Would throwing me under the bus save her? Could she claim I'd sabotaged her data? "If there's been an error in our analysis," she began, "I'll need to review with my team." "Your team?" Marcus interrupted. "Who exactly prepared this presentation?" The question hung in the air. Madison's mouth opened and closed. She couldn't claim sole credit now that it was falling apart, but admitting she'd relied on others would reveal her incompetence. "I oversee all strategic initiatives," she managed. "The responsibility is mine." "Then you'll understand why we need to reconsider this partnership." David Park stood, signaling to his team. "We came here expecting Veriton's renowned analytical rigor. Instead, we get a presentation that could have been prepared by someone who's never looked at our actual business." They filed out without shaking hands. The door clicked shut with a finality that echoed through the silent conference room. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. Then the deputy director's phone rang, a sharp, demanding sound. He looked at the caller ID and his face went from pale to ashen. "I need to take this," he muttered, fleeing the room. Madison stood alone at the front, her perfect presentation still glowing on the screen behind her. Slide 16 of 47. A growth projection chart based on markets Rexlon no longer operated in. The junior associates began filing out quietly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Within minutes, only Madison and I remained. She turned to me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger or accusation, but genuine bewilderment. "The data was from your files," she said quietly. "Your analysis." "From Q1, I replied, standing slowly. "Before the Technova acquisition, before the subsidiary sale, before Marcus Rivera restructured their entire go-to-market strategy." "But," she struggled with the concept, "you gave me your files." "You asked for my files. You got them. All of them. Including the Q1 analysis, the Q2 preliminary reports, and the Q3 updated projections that accounted for every major market shift." I picked up my laptop. "Did you look at the file dates? Did you notice there were 3 versions of the Rexlon analysis? Did you even wonder why the numbers changed between quarters?" Her silence was answer enough. "You wanted my job," I continued, moving toward the door. "You got it. But the job isn't just sitting in meetings and delivering presentations. It's understanding why numbers change, recognizing when market conditions shift, knowing your clients well enough to spot when data doesn't match reality." "You knew," she whispered. "You knew and you didn't say anything." I paused at the door. "I sent an anonymous email Sunday night highlighting every data discrepancy. Check your spam folder." The aftermath moved quickly. Within an hour, an emergency meeting was called. The CEO, board members, and senior leadership gathered in the executive conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Madison being questioned, the deputy director gesturing frantically, printed slides being passed around the table. I returned to my cubicle and continued working on the Patterson Industries proposal, the one Madison would have fumbled if I hadn't stepped in last week. My phone buzzed with texts from colleagues who'd heard about the disaster, but I didn't respond. The story would spread on its own without my help. At 4:47 p.m., an email went out to all staff from the CEO. Effective immediately, all strategic initiatives will be under review. Please continue with your current projects while we assess our client engagement protocols. Corporate speak for, heads are about to roll. Madison's assistant appeared at my cubicle at 5:15, looking uncomfortable. They want to see you in the executive conference room. I saved my work, straightened my blazer, and walked through the office. Every eye followed my progress. The copy machine had stopped its endless whirring. Even the break room was empty. The entire floor held its breath. As I approached the conference room, I saw Madison through the glass, sitting alone at the far end of the table, her face streaked with tears. The deputy director was nowhere to be seen, but the CEO was there, along with the board chair and the head of legal. Time to face the music. But this time, I wouldn't be the one singing off-key. The executive conference room felt different from this side of the table. For 10 years, I'd sat here as head of strategy, presenting wins, navigating challenges, building the relationships to keep Veriton competitive. Now I entered as the senior strategic advisor who just watched a $6.2 million deal implode. CEO Richard Blackstone didn't waste time on pleasantries. Sit. Natalie, we need to understand what happened today. I took the chair across from Madison, who wouldn't meet my eyes. The board chair, Helen Yamamoto, slid a printed email across the table. My anonymous warning from Sunday night, extracted from Madison's spam folder. You sent this, Helen said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Why anonymously? Richard leaned forward. Why not come directly to leadership? I chose my words carefully. Would you have listened? Madison was the chosen successor, backed by the deputy director. I was the outdated perspective that needed to be optimized out of the strategic process. An anonymous warning seemed more likely to be evaluated on its merits rather than dismissed as sour grapes. But it was ignored anyway, Helen observed. That's not my failure, I replied evenly. Richard pulled up another document on his tablet, a timeline I recognized. My login history from the shared drive, showing every file accessed, every document I'd reviewed to fix Madison's mistakes over the past 6 weeks. You've been cleaning up errors behind the scenes, he said. The Patterson proposal, the Nexus account review. Even the quarterly board presentation had your fingerprints on it, though Madison presented it as her work. I said nothing. The evidence spoke for itself. What I don't understand, Helen interjected, is why you didn't let these failures surface earlier. Why protect someone who was actively undermining you? Because I wasn't protecting Madison, I answered. I was protecting Veriton's relationships. Clients don't care about internal politics. They care about results. The Patterson deal was worth $3.4 million. Nexus represents 15% of our annual revenue. Was I supposed to let those relationships burn to prove a point? Madison finally spoke, her voice hoarse. You set me up. You gave me outdated files. I gave you everything. I cut her off. 3/4 of analysis. Updated projections. Current market data. The same files I'd been using to manage these accounts successfully. I turned to Richard. Check the access logs. Every current file was in the folder I transferred. She just didn't bother to look past Q1. Because that's what you were using in your handover notes. Madison's composure cracked completely. You highlighted the Q1 analysis as a baseline for comparison. Did you read the next paragraph where I explained the market shifts? Did you open the folder labeled Critical Q2 Updates, Technova Acquisition Impact? Did you even glance at the email I sent 2 weeks ago explaining why all Rexlon projections needed to be rebuilt from scratch? Silence. Richard pulled up another document. Madison, it says here you logged into the system at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday and deleted several files from the shared drive. Can you explain? Madison's lawyer-trained composure finally shattered completely. The story tumbled out: how the deputy director had promised her fast-track promotion, how they'd planned to modernize the strategy department by pushing out legacy thinkers, how she'd been told the actual work was easy if you just had the right connections and presentation skills. Where is Deputy Director Morrison now? Helen asked quietly. In my office, Richard replied, composing his resignation. The room fell silent except for Madison's quiet sniffling. Richard typed something on his tablet, then looked at me. Natalie, what would it take to salvage the Rexlon relationship? I'd been preparing for this question since slide 3. David Park is old school. He values competence and honesty above all else. We need to admit our error immediately, not the data mistake, but the organizational failure that allowed it to happen. Then we present the real analysis, the one that shows we actually understand their business. You have this analysis? I opened my laptop, pulled up the files I'd been maintaining in parallel. The real Rexlon story. Post-acquisition synergies, market expansion opportunities, integration strategies that acknowledge their new reality. Everything Madison should have presented, but didn't understand enough to recognize. This is excellent work, Helen said after scanning through it. When did you prepare this? Over the past 3 weeks. When I realized Madison was using outdated data, I built a contingency plan. But you didn't share it. I wasn't asked. My role was advisory. Madison made it clear my input wasn't welcome. I looked directly at her. You can't demand someone's expertise while simultaneously telling them they're irrelevant. Richard stood. Madison, please wait outside. Legal will discuss your options with you. She gathered her things with shaking hands, her designer heels clicking uncertainly on the floor. At the door, she turned back. I really thought I was ready. Thinking you're ready and being ready are very different things, I said, not unkindly. The difference usually shows up around slide 3. After she left, Richard turned to me. We have a problem, and I think you know what I'm going to ask. I did. But this time, I'd make sure the terms were mine. The negotiation that followed was unlike any performance review I'd ever experienced. Richard Blackstone, Helen Yamamoto, and I sat in that conference room as equals discussing terms, not as executives dictating to a subordinate. We need you back as head of strategy. Richard said simply. The question is what it'll take to make that happen. I'd learned something valuable over the past 6 weeks. Desperation shifts power. They needed me more than I needed them. Veriton had just embarrassed itself in front of a $6.2 million client. The deputy director was crafting his resignation. Madison would be gone by morning. They had no succession plan, no backup strategy, and every major client would be questioning Veriton's stability. First, let's talk about what went wrong, I said, opening my laptop. This wasn't just about Madison's incompetence or Morrison's favoritism. This was systematic failure in how we evaluate and promote talent. Helen nodded. We're listening. I pulled up a presentation I'd been crafting during my cubicle exile, not about Rexlon or any client, but about Veriton itself. Over the past 2 years, we've lost 6 senior strategists. Each time, they were replaced by someone younger, cheaper, with fresh perspectives. Each time, we lost institutional knowledge that took years to rebuild. Markets evolve, Richard countered. We need people who understand new technologies, new approaches. Madison is 29 and didn't know Rexlon had acquired their biggest competitor. I interrupted. Age doesn't determine relevance. Curiosity does. Diligence does. The ability to read beyond slide templates does. I clicked through my analysis, showing the correlation between our talent decisions and client losses. The data was damning. Every time we prioritized connections over competence, presentation over substance, we hemorrhaged relationships that had taken decades to build. So what are you proposing? Helen asked. New structure. Head of strategy reports directly to the CEO, not through any deputy director. Full autonomy on hiring decisions within the strategy team. Mentorship programs that actually develop talent instead of fast-tracking people who aren't ready. I paused. And my compensation needs to reflect the real value I bring, not what you could get away with paying when you thought I had no options. Richard and Helen exchanged glances. What number did you have in mind? I named it. Richard didn't flinch, a good sign. It was 40% more than my previous salary, but still less than what they'd lose if even one more major client walked. There's one more thing, I added. Madison. She's finished here, Richard said flatly. No. I closed my laptop. She's 29, ambitious, and just learned the hardest lesson of her career. You can fire her and she'll make the same mistakes somewhere else, or you can put her in a junior analyst role, reporting to me, and actually teach her how this job works. After what she did to you. Helen's eyebrows rose. What she did to me is irrelevant. What she almost did to Veritan is what matters. But she has potential. She just skipped about 10 steps getting here. I thought about my own career, the mentors who'd shaped me, the failures that had taught me more than any success. Give me 6 months with her. If she can't cut it, she's gone. If she can, you'll have someone who understands both the strategy and the stakes. The room went quiet. Richard typed notes on his tablet while Helen studied me with the intensity that had made her legendary in boardrooms across Denver. You're a better person than I would be, Helen finally said. I'm not being altruistic. A Madison who's learned from failure is more valuable than any eager MBA who thinks PowerPoint skills equal strategic thinking. Plus, I smiled grimly. She'll never forget who gave her a second chance. Richard stood. Draft a formal proposal, compensation package, reporting structure, your vision for the department. Have it on my desk by tomorrow afternoon. And Rexlon? Helen asked. I'll call David Park tonight. Full transparency about what happened, why it happened, and how we're fixing it. Then I'll fly to their headquarters Thursday with the real proposal, the one that shows we actually understand their business. I gathered my things. If we're honest about our failures and brilliant in our recovery, we might salvage this. Might. Richard winced. Would you trust a company that just tried to sell you solutions to problems you don't have? I asked. We'll have to earn their confidence back. But at least now we have someone who knows what their actual problems are. I left them in the conference room and walked back through the office. The cubicle farm was buzzing with speculation, conversations stopping as I passed. Tomorrow the announcement would go out. Tomorrow I'd reclaim my office, rebuild my team, and start fixing the damage. But tonight, I had a phone call to make to David Park. Sometimes the best strategic move is simply admitting when you've screwed up and showing you're smart enough to fix it. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Madison. I heard what you proposed. Why? I typed back. Because someone once gave me a second chance when I thought I knew everything. Show up ready to learn, or don't show up at all. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. I'll be there. Phase 1 of the recovery was complete. Now came the hard part, proving we deserved another shot at that $6.2 million Rs. 3 months later, I stood before a different audience in the same conference room where Madison's career had nearly ended. This time, I was presenting to our internal leadership summit. 70 of Veritan's top performers gathered for quarterly strategic planning. Next slide, please, I said to my assistant. Madison clicked forward, and slide 3 appeared on the screen. A comprehensive analysis of our Q3 performance, including the Rexlon deal we'd not only salvaged, but expanded to $8.4 million. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who'd been there that day. The Rexlon recovery teaches us something critical, I continued, making eye contact with faces both familiar and new. Failure isn't falling down, it's refusing to understand why you fell. In the front row, David Park nodded approvingly. He'd become one of our strongest advocates after witnessing how we'd handled the crisis. The brutal honesty of that phone call followed by a flawless presentation that demonstrated deep understanding of their post-acquisition reality, had transformed disaster into opportunity. Madison had evolved too. The entitled young woman who'd stolen my chair had been replaced by someone humbler, hungrier to actually learn rather than just advance. She still had ambition, that never left, but now it was tempered with competence. She'd earned her seat at this table. Before we break for lunch, I announced, I want to share something. Someone recently asked how I felt watching that original deal fall apart. Was I angry? Vindicated? Satisfied? I paused, letting the question hang. I felt none of those things. Because in that moment, watching someone crash on slide 3, I realized something. Competence isn't about being right. It's about ensuring the right outcomes happen, regardless of who gets credit. The room was silent, absorbing the message. But, I added with a slight smile, that doesn't mean we should reward incompetence or tolerate those who mistake confidence for capability. It means we build systems that develop real expertise, that value substance over style, that recognize the difference between a good presentation and good strategy. Applause rippled through the room. Richard Blackstone stood, signaling the session's end. As people filed out for lunch, several stopped to shake my hand, to share their own stories of corporate survival and revival. Madison lingered, helping disconnect the presentation equipment. You know, she said quietly, I never thanked you properly, not just for the second chance, but for letting me fail in the first place. Letting you fail? I raised an eyebrow. You could have stopped it. One conversation with Richard before that meeting, and I would have been out. Instead, you let me learn the lesson publicly, dramatically, undeniably. She carefully coiled the display cables. It was brutal, but anything less wouldn't have worked. She was right, though I hadn't thought of it that way at the time. Some lessons can't be taught, they have to be experienced. Madison, I called as she headed for the door. Good work on the Mitchell Industries proposal. Your analysis of their distribution challenges was excellent. She turned back, a genuine smile replacing her old practiced one. I actually read their 10K this time, all 4 quarters worth. After she left, I stood alone in the conference room where so much had changed. My corner office was 2 floors up now, with an even better view of the Rockies. The strategy team had expanded from 6 to 12. Our client retention rate was at a 5-year high. But the best part, every Monday morning, I held what we called Slide 3 sessions. Brutal. Honest reviews of our work where we identified weak points before clients could. Madison often led these, having become our most ruthless critic of surface-level analysis. The deputy director? He landed at a competitor 6 weeks after resigning. Last I heard, he was pushing another fast-track promotion scheme. Some people never learn. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. I had a 2 p.m. with a potential new client, followed by Madison's performance review. She was ready for more responsibility, this time having earned every step of the climb. I gathered my things and headed for the elevator. As I passed the cubicle farm, I heard the familiar whir of the copy machine, the ding of the microwave, the buzz of people doing real work. Once, these sounds had symbolized my humiliation. Now they reminded me that every level of this organization mattered, that competence wasn't about your office location, but about understanding your value and delivering it consistently. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. Someone had left a printed slide on the floor from some presentation, some pitch, some make-or-break moment in someone's career. I picked it up and smiled. It was slide 3, of course. It's always slide 3 where the truth reveals itself. Sometimes you're the one presenting it. Sometimes you're the one watching it crash. But if you're smart, if you're patient, if you understand that revenge is best served not cold but competent, sometimes you don't need to say a word. The truth has a way of speaking for itself. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate karma and strategic patience, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever had your own slide 3 moment? I'd love to hear about it.